In this movie, I'll introduce you to a few terms and ideas that will help you understand the core concept of luminance inside of a digital image. And these terms and ideas will not only help you get through this chapter, but they'll also help you when you sit down to modify your own images in the future. Now, even though we perceive digital photographs, even a washed out one like this, as being in color, it's actually a function of multiple grayscale images working together. And every one of those grayscale images has luminance levels that go as dark as black and as bright as white, with a bunch of different gray values in between. Now, the darkest of the luminance levels over here on the left-hand side of this gradient are known as the shadows. The brightest luminance levels over here on the right side of the gradient are the highlights, and everything in between is known as the midtones. Now, there's no hard border at which the shadows stop and the midtones begin, or at which the midtones stop and the highlights begin. It's all a big continuum. But if I had to measure this digital image, then the shadows would be these areas that I've now mapped out in black. The highlights would be these guys that I've painted yellow, and the midtones are the ones that I've painted purple. Now, as I was saying, what we see is a full color image. Photoshop sees as multiple grayscale images working together. These grayscale images are known as channels. And like any digital photograph, this image contains a total of 3 channels. The first channel is the red channel, the second is the green channel, and the third is the blue channel. Now, wherever the highlights in the red and green channels overlap, we get yellow. Where the highlights in the green and blue channels overlap, we get cyan. And where the highlights in the blue and red channels overlap, we get magenta. If we have highlights in all 3 channels, we end up with white. And if we have shadows in all 3 channels, then we end up with black. All right, let's go ahead and return to our original washed out photograph here. And I'm going to go up to the window menu and choose the channels command in order to bring up the channels panel. Up at the top here, we're seeing the RGB composite view. That is the full color image, followed by each of the component channels, red, green, and blue. Now, I can switch to the red channel just by clicking on it, at which point we will see a grayscale image. Now, unfortunately, we don't really have any black or white pixels where this image is concerned. In fact, I can measure the darkest pixel by switching to the eyedropper tool, which has a keyboard shortcut of I. And now notice that the foreground color, which is black by default, is showing up here inside this hue field as a little circle in the lower left corner. If I go ahead and click inside this nostril, let's say, in order to lift what appears to be the darkest color in this channel, then you can see that circle bounce upward, which tells us that we are not dealing with black. And in fact, if we wanted to see what this luminance level really is, then I could go ahead and click on the flyout menu icon in the upper right corner of the color panel, and I could choose HSB sliders. And we're now seeing that the brightness value is 27%. 0% would be black, by the way, and 100% would be white. And just to get a sense of where that is inside of our big black to white gradient, I'll go ahead and click and drag around here and notice that 27% is right about there. So we're missing this entire range of shadows inside this channel. If I switch to the green channel, then things darken up a little bit. I'll go ahead and click inside that nostril again and notice the brightness value now descends to 22%. And if I go ahead and drag inside the gradient, that's right about there. So a few pixels over to the left, but certainly not very dark. And finally, the blue channel is a little bit darker still, but we still don't have any real shadows. Fortunately, it's an easy matter to correct this image inside Photoshop. I'll just go ahead and switch back to the RGB composite at the top of the channels panel. And then I'll go up to the image menu and choose what is probably the simplest of all the luminance correction functions inside Photoshop, auto contrast. And what this command does is it takes the darkest pixel and it makes it black. It takes the brightest pixel and makes it white, and it stretches out all the other luminance levels in between. And as a result, we get this corrected version of the photograph here. And now notice if I switch to the red channel and click inside that nostril, look at that. The brightness value descends to 0%. So we have an actual black pixel in this image. The same goes for the green channel and the blue channel as well. which is why when we switch back to the RGB composite, we end up with this much better looking version of the photograph. And so just by choosing a single command, we've been able to transform this undeniably washed out photograph into this much better looking image here. And that is at least an introduction to the way Luminance works inside the narrow world of Photoshop, as well as the larger world of digital photography.